and let people go around the table, and so you have an idea of who's here, and then we'll turn it over to the auditors. So I'm obviously here.
Lydia is here.
Jolie Valentino.
Amy.
Ken Smith.
Christina Baylor, Audit Manager for the State Auditor's Office. Courtney Emerson.
At the State Auditor's Office. Here it is.
Okay.
Alright. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Were the documents sent over, or should we just kind of, as far as the nurse down the phone?
She doesn't have them. So.
Okay, so we'll make sure we cover it a little bit more in detail then. So we're actually here to present the entrance conference for two separate audits for North Shore School District this year. You are one of the lucky chosen randomly sampled local governments to participate in a pension audit, which is a new set of audits that is tied to GASB 68. So each year there is a new sample drawn by our pension auditor for DRS, and North Shore happened to be one of the lucky ones, but you never know who's going to be chosen. We are in round 3, I believe so right now, so at least you escaped the first 2 rounds, and so you are part of round 3.
So what is it? I couldn't hear that.
Sure. So besides the regular scheduled audit, maybe we'll go through that one first. This is the second document that we're discussing, but it's a secondary audit. The good news is it's free to the district. It doesn't cost any money. But there was a new accounting standard that required local governments and all governments actually to start reporting their portion of the liability for pension plans. So the pension plans for your employees that are run through DRS. So that would be your TERS plans, your PERS plans. All of the district's portion of that liability is now required to be not only on your financial statements, but also part of the state of Washington's financial statements. And to determine whether or not the state of Washington is reporting an accurate value for that liability, there are a lot of governments that are making up that liability. So what they did was they hired a third-party auditor to come in and perform a sample of everybody that is contributing to that liability for the whole state of Washington.
So can I ask,
Okay.
so can I ask a question, and maybe we'll get into it when we get there, but for us, as the school district, isn't the pension system more or less a pay-as-you-go? I mean, we're paying the appropriate amounts, our obligations, into the pension system as we pay our employees. So do we have a long-term liability, or is it associated with vacation cash out or sick leave cash out at retirement? Is that?
So my peers don't believe that GASB 68 is appropriate for the state of Washington because we don't have a liability should the state of Washington default. But at the moment, we are held to the same GASB standard as every other state in the nation, which is kind of a made-up number because should DRS default, we would not pay the pension liabilities for our past employees.
So let me ask the clarifying. So the pension plan that our employees are under is essentially an entity of the states. And so if there were any pension difficulty, the employees would have action against the pension plan at the state, not the district.
Correct.
Okay, so in some sense, it's a separate reporting entity. So then your audit, if I'm understanding right, for the pension piece is auditing the people who are enrolled, the money that's going in, the assets that would be, if they're separately identifiable to them, but it's really a separate entity.
And yeah, for the most part, there's 2 separate sides of it. There's obviously the school district is beginning to report a liability on for GASB 68, and that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is what the state is going to be reporting, and we're auditing all of the employers that participate in the programs to make sure that the numbers that you're sending up to DRS are supported by employee files, and that's why you're not paying for this audit. Really, the audits have to be conducted on site because that's where you house your employee records, but we're really just making sure that employees participating in the program are eligible to participate, that non-eligible employees are not participating, and that everything is well supported.
So then in some sense, it's a compliance, it's more compliance focused.
It's attestation.
Yeah.
Okay, and then on that, you said that we report a liability or net asset or net liability?
Yeah, well, that's what Lydia was talking about.
Yeah, so starting this year, Jolie can speak better to this than I, we are required to report the liability in our notes to the financial statements, which perhaps many of us don't believe is a true liability in
Okay.
the nature because we are not secondarily liable.
Gotcha. So even if the pension fund is underfunded, using that language, actually determined, it's not our unfunded liability as the district. Thank
But
you.
we still are required to report.
It's still
under
required to be
GASB
reported, but
68,
it's not.
the way that the state auditors and OSBI have interpreted it.
Okay. Good to know.
Yes. And so that audit really just came through. We just got approval to move forward with that in a couple hours prior to this meeting.
Earlier this afternoon.
As we signed the engagement letter with Department of Retirement Systems. So Courtney will add that to her scope. It's been pretty quick in the last 2 rounds, so they don't take a lot of time. She'll be working with your payroll and your HR staff. And then we're just waiting for the sample to be compiled and sent our way, which should be about a week and a half out or so.
Yeah, and given the fact that we've pretty much gone through this, I can just tell you the budget is about 35 hours, but again, it's not going to be.
For that
changed.
portion of the
For
audit.
that portion, sorry, but,
And you're doing that.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep, and just so you're aware of it too, the interesting part is that this is for the July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2015 period, which obviously doesn't line up with the, school district's year end, so.
Okay.
Okay.
That takes care of that.
Well, that's
There you go.
So we're just going backwards here. So now to the regular scheduled audit. So we are pleased to, so we are pleased to be back on site. We fulfilled our commitment to Jolie. We said, you're going to be our first school district this year. And so we put you ahead of the pack. And so we are here in early January for you. But we are here to conduct the same normal 3 types of audits that we did last year. Courtney is returning this year. She's wearing a dual hat as the lead auditor and the supervisor. But she will walk you through that first document, which talks about the scope of each audit she's going to conduct.
All right, so as you are aware, we are conducting both or I guess I should say all 3 audits for accountability, financial compliance, or its financial statements as well as federal compliance. So the first portion talks about the accountability audit, and so what we have done in the last couple of weeks is we've done some what we call planning procedures to just get an idea of what's happened in the last year. I've spoken with all of the board members, or Scott and myself have spoken with all the board members and superintendent, and spoken with Jolie and kind of looked through your minutes just to gain an understanding of what's going on in the district. And then from that, we have compiled what we consider to be the areas that we are going to look at, which is in the middle of the page there. And so the first one is for self-insurance. The next is for the Open Public Meetings Act. We're going to take a look at an apportionment specific to basic enrollment. We're going to look at ASB, bid law compliance, the transportation department, as well as fundraising and donations. And so are there any questions about any of those areas that you want some clarification?
I would. So on self-insurance, I know you did a lot of work
Yes.
last year, so what would be the additional work?
So this is an area, it's a required risk for all school districts this year that we're going to do. We're basically just compiling some more information about the self-insurance in addition to what we did last year, because there's going to be some additional review of self-insurance in the next few years. And so our schools team specialists have really said, like, let's start looking at it now to get an idea of who is self-insuring, what kind of self-insurance there is, so that we can determine in the future where to focus some additional testing.
So my understanding is we're the only remaining district that does self-insure
For medical.
for medical.
Some still do vision and dental.
Right.
Okay.
As well as unemployment.
And I can't speak for the
Unemployment, I know
last, but I know.
there's cooperatives across the state
Right.
for unemployment, so.
But there's
okay.
still some vision and dental
Okay.
in the world.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So, and Matt's been working on this, he's working on wrapping it up, so, but we did take into consideration what we did last year as well, so, yeah.
And then if you could expand on the fundraising donations.
Sure. There was some items that came up just that there was some fundraising that was done as well as some donations, and those are always higher risk just because you never know when donations are going to be brought in, and so it's making sure that donations are being used with based on what their intended purpose was. There is also an issue for fundraising that came up, just looking at the process over Kenmore Junior High, that there was, I believe it was a theft was the concern. And so looking at the process over that, over the fundraising process, just to make sure that the controls are in place and that items are being monitored.
Okay.
So,
Any particular areas in ASB you'll be looking at?
Honestly, ASB was selected just as a whole because we haven't looked at it in the last few audits. And so ASB in general is higher risk just with the additional, students are more involved. And so we're gonna do an overall assessment of ASB just to kind of get an idea of what the process is over monitoring ASB activities, and then select some more specific areas for testing based on what we our overall review of the system and the process in place over it. So,
Okay.
yeah, it didn't have a specific, but it's more of a, we haven't looked at it in a few years, so we try to,
Good areas.
we try to look at that every few years if we haven't, so.
And then is transportation just looking at the STARS reports and kind of the accuracy of those, or?
Well, and this one actually is not looking at the apportionment side of it. With the
Okay.
STARS program, we haven't looked at transportation in several years for that reason, because there's been a lot of change and there's still a lot of change going on with that. And so one of the reasons why transportation was selected was we haven't actually looked at that department as a whole, because we haven't looked at enrollment in the last few years. And so it's another one where we're just going to take a look at the department overall to make sure that there's adequate oversight, that it's, assets are being monitored adequately, and what's going on in that department. And then from there we'll determine if there's additional testing that's needed for some more specifics. So it's more of an overall system or department review. So.
And just a question in terms of materiality for the accountability audit.
There isn't a materiality threshold for the accountability audit because, a dollar stolen is still concerning to a citizen. So we don't apply a materiality threshold per se. We do consider that if we find an issue as far as how high to report it. We take into consideration, consistency across the state and public interest. But there isn't a threshold, People don't like it when they see one iPad stolen versus 50, those are things that we kind of kind of keys in on. Are there any areas that we haven't selected that there's interest in having us take a look at while we're out here?
It's a pretty big list.
It is. It's possible that it could get amended as we, get through and start getting into the middle of things, but we'll let you know if there's anything that drops off or has to be added in. But this is our most complete list that we have at this point. Right.
Okay.
So the next section has to do with the financial statement audit. We're looking at taking a look at the processes over how your financial statements are prepared. As I'm sure you are all aware of from the discussion of prior audits, we are not looking at every single balance on your financial statements. We take a risk-based approach, but we will be providing an opinion on your financial statements at the end of the audit. And that's pretty much the financial audit. The federal compliance audit, we have again done the planning procedures. The two programs that we have selected is the nutrition cluster as well as improving teacher quality. So again, we will make sure that the federal compliance audit is completed in time to submit the data collection form. And now that the clearinghouse is back up and running, we can get that submitted timely. Go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe before we jump out of here, just so you are aware, the federal guidelines are changing. They have changed for everyone on a calendar year already, but since school districts are not on the calendar year, you get one more year before you have to move over to that. One of the changes that you can expect is because the district reports on a modified accrual basis, there are new guidance out there in the federal single audit world that requires anybody that does not report on full GAAP to have an increased threshold for the amount of programs that need to be audited. Basically, they're going to consider all governments that don't report on GAAP as high risk, which Lydia, you probably recall, in the past, if you were considered a high-risk entity, it was usually because you had a finding or you hadn't had a single audit in the past 2 years, and that meant the difference between having 25% of the programs on your CFA audited versus 50%. So the guidelines are changing now so that you're automatically high risk if you're reporting on modified accrual, but they did lower the threshold from 50% to 40%. So there was some give, but that just means that next year you might see an increase in your single audit budget because of the new requirements. For schools, it shouldn't impact too much because most of your programs are so large that it doesn't require us to add another program to meet that coverage. I mean, usually if you're picking Title I special ed or nutrition, you're way above that threshold anyway. So we just want to let you know that there could be some slight changes, but luckily you have 1 more year before you have to get on board there.
Bigger issue for smaller districts.
Yeah, yeah.
And then just from a materiality perspective, ballpark nutrition and or teacher quality, how are we talking? 5 million, 20 million?
It depends on the total expenditures for the program. So whatever the total expenditures were for the nutrition cluster or the improving teacher quality, we usually set a 10% materiality threshold for total program expenditures. Now in the federal arena, if we ever find $10,000 in question cost, even if that's below 10%, that's an automatic finding.
10,000, which is the finding threshold for,
Mhm.
but I meant how much, do you remember ballpark do we get from nutrition?
Let me guess. This is a guess.
Okay,
I want to say 3 million
okay,
between all of it, and then Title II is about 300,000.
okay.
I know it's above 300,000 because it met the type A program, so, yeah.
Okay.
But, I can tell you what they were
Yeah.
off the top of my head. All right.
And then, I'm sorry, since you mentioned the full gap issue, how many districts in the state school districts follow full gap? We follow the statutory or modified or whatever you call that.
I believe the number is 8.
I think you're right.
It's under
Okay,
it.
so it's just 8.
Yeah, not very many, not even Seattle School District follows GAP.
I was guessing 7, so 8.
Yeah, that was my guess.
We have one in our area, it's
Yeah.
Everett, but
Mhm.
that's the only one in our area.
All right, so moving to the next item, the engagement letter, I just provided it to Jolie. This is new, I believe we gave it to you last year, was the first year, so, but it identifies the cost of the audit, which we'll go over shortly, and the estimated timeline of completing the audit, so. We've provided that. The levels of reporting have not changed, but I'll revisit them just to make sure everybody is aware of them. Our highest reporting levels of finding, if you were to receive a finding, you would have the opportunity to include your response with the finding, which is also included in the audit report. The management letter is our next level down. These are still items that are significant that we want to bring to the attention of management, and so we do provide a formal letter. However, it's not included in the audit report, it's just referenced in there. So, and then our lowest level are exit items. These are items that are just minor, what we often call housekeeping items, things that we generally don't even discuss at the exit, just items we bring up to management to be aware of to make sure that they don't escalate to anything larger. We do like to remind everybody that if there is any confidential information provided, please make sure to let us know so we can take the steps to keep it confidential. We have your audit costs set to be approximately $50,000 for the audit work and an additional $6,000 for travel and other expenses. Jolie is our main contact, so we've already been in communication with her regularly, but throughout the audit we'll be keeping her up to date on anything that comes up during the audit. There is a new, I guess I shouldn't say it's new, but there is an audit issue process in place that if you had any unresolved disagreements or concerns during the audit, at the conclusion of the audit, we'll summarize the results of the exit conference, and then if there are any difficulties or disagreements during the audit, we'll make sure that there is some resolution, there's a process to go through. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of that if there's any concern.
And even prior to the exit conference, we're happy to set those many meetings with any personnel that you think might be beneficial to talk to. So all the way up to Jan, Judy, our deputy state auditor, whoever you want to talk to, we can set up for you.
At the conclusion of the audit, we'll be providing a customer service survey. It is a new survey, it has some different questions, and hopefully can can provide some feedback for us to help the audit run more smoothly. So do appreciate any feedback that you can provide. Just a reminder in there about loss reporting. If a loss were to occur, it is required by state law to let our office know. So just a reminder in there. There's also a link to our website that has where you could provide the information for a loss report. So it can all be done online. I just want to remind you. There are some emerging issues which I've gone through, and most of these you are already aware of, but I just wanted to point them out in there if you want to obtain some more information on them. The minimum fund balance policies have changed, as you know, and have already changed in your financial statements that needed to be moved from committed to unassigned, which you have already done. The unemployment claim servicing arrangements, they are, once it's available from the ESDs, the districts should correct their unaudited financial statements to report the applicable activity, which you have already done, so that has already been taken care of. Same with equity interest in joint ventures. It needs to be reported on in the notes to your financial statements, which you again have already taken care of. And then we already discussed GASB 68 quite a bit, but there is some more information in there just to remind you that there is a new requirement to be in compliance with GASB 68 and to report it accordingly, which again, we've already discussed this, but it is in there. There's some information there, so just want to point that out. We also want to talk about some of the available resources to the district, and again, these are more reminders, but we do have some support services through our local government support team. One of the biggest things is our help desk. You can go online on our website and submit any help desk questions that you have. It's a free service, and our district specialists, our school district specialists will respond, or depending on the type of request, any of our other specialists statewide will be in contact with you about any questions that you might have, whether we're on site or throughout the audit. So don't hesitate to use that service. They're always available and happy to help. The other area that we always want to talk about now is the Local Government Performance Center. Again, this is a service that is free for the district to use. It's primarily available for trainings, but they also offer additional tools. I believe one of the newest one is the FIT tool for to be able to see where you are financially. There's some analytical items in there that you can take a look at that data, and you can compare the district to other like size districts. There's a lot of good information in there, and it's all on our website. So we do want to point that out to make sure that you are aware of that. And we are also including at the bottom, it talks about the audit team that is involved in the audit. In addition to Jan, Kelly, and Sadie, and Christina and myself, we also have Matt, who will be working, or has already been working on the audit and was here last year, as well as Jessica and Scott. We'll be seeing them around the district if you haven't already. We like to include our information if you have any questions about the staff that are going to be working on the audit. So, are there any questions about any of the areas that we're going to be looking at? We've kind of already discussed GASB 68, so that's really all we have.
I have a few questions, I just want to make sure. So this document, the second document, was just about what you're calling GASB 68 pension attestation.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a couple questions. I can just double check. So in terms of one of the questions that has been brought up in some of the board discussions earlier was the notion of the cash balance that the district has. And you mentioned this FIT tool. Is that the kind of the ratios and the things? That's a place where we could go to kind of see comparative to other districts and.
Yeah, it's not like the first revisions that came out where you actually saw like the top 5 closest districts to you. I think, have they changed it for schools? Are schools part of it now? I feel like they're modified accrual.
I think so.
Okay.
I think that they were going to be talking to OSPI
Okay.
the last time I talked to her.
That's
on
right.
the
Yeah.
side.
Oh, so
Right,
districts,
it's
school
not-
districts aren't in that
that's
FIT tool. Oh.
Yeah, the history of kind of financial, it started in the school district arena. Our office came up with some ratios that are common ratios out in the accounting world, and we used that with all the information we're already gathering to provide a tool so you could see where you fell against other school districts. Well, we've learned a lot since then, namely you don't want to be compared to other districts. And so that information, there was a lot of talks to OSBI. OSBI came out with their own tools. And so they have that available, and I think they used our initial spreadsheet and kind of made some modifications. Separate from that is a new fit tool on our website that is not available for schools yet, but is really neat.
It is neat.
It's really neat, so if you're a catch bases entity, you could already see it, but it might come down in the future for school districts, it's once they get it working, and they hired a third-party contractor to develop this really nifty tool where it takes all of the information, kind of similar to the ratios, but it's interactive. You can put budget numbers into it if you want to see what would happen if this happens, and you can kind of see your trends. It takes some of those key ratios so you can see, but it no longer says, here's the 5 most comparable districts. If you'd like to compare yourself to other districts, what it does is it does pull the 3 closest, but it averages their information. So you can see how the district would fall against the average of the closest 3, but schools and other local governments they wanted to compare themselves against others, but they didn't want others to be able to compare themselves against them. So that's why they have
We actually do a 16-digit comparison every year after the financials are released by OSPI, and have really tweaked and redesigned that comparison over the years for meaningful data. For instance, not in capital, Ken, but in general fund, we do review our ending fund balance in the general fund compared to our peers, and by our peers, it's large school districts, because comparing against, a small school district does not very much good. Also, the second thing was the legislature directed OSPI to come up with the financial health indicators after the demise of Vader, because the legislature said that ESDs need to be in charge of checking the financial health of their districts. So they, in conjunction with OSPI, designed the current system that is used under the legislative umbrella. So,
And it sounds like some of this is moot because school districts aren't part of this yet.
Not
But when
yet.
you say the closest 3 districts, what does that mean? Does that mean the district's closest in size to you, student enrollment, geographic closeness, or sort of budgetary profile?
It hasn't been designed yet for schools, but under the initial format, I believe it was based off revenues and FTEs they were looking at, and so they didn't do the closest in proximity because the schools are so varied in their sizes. They really wanted to kind of give you that. But there were some problems with the first version. I mean, debt load was one of the frequent indicators that we had conversations about, because if it's voted debt versus non-voted debt, that's a big impact, So there were some kinks with that, and I haven't looked at OSBI's version recently, but outside of the arena of school districts, from other local governments, we were getting the feedback of, this is what we want, but we don't want our stuff to be out there. So they were trying to compromise and come up with a way that you can kind of see a benchmark without having your specific details out there. So who knows if that.
I know Kimberly said she had to log off at 4:35, so I wonder if we should ask her if she had any questions.
Oh, I have a comment. I don't have any questions that I can think of, so.
Then the next, it's useful to hear about the other type of stuff. In terms of the fund balance designation and capital projects, so this has been kind of a question that we've been, just trying to find out. One of the questions I have is just, and we talked about the unassigned, the committed, and some of those others. Where in your auditing do you look at that? And at what level of materiality do you look at that kind of is that just in the financial statement audit, or would that be in the accountability audit?
Well, as far as the classification between the fund balance, it's typically something that we would cover in the financial statement audit. Did we look at it last year? It's not a requirement that we look at every year, but they just worked with OSBI to update the guidance in the accounting manual, so.
Right. They
So-
we looked at the fund balance as far as how it was reported as far as committed or unassigned. So we did look at that last year. And then we
And I think you mentioned it
changes.
was already corrected, so it would be covered
just
in
at that point as far as where it was reported, yeah.
But you don't look at necessarily You're just looking at the appropriate reporting of the amounts, not necessarily a policy decision about the appropriateness of those amounts.
No, we're just looking for the accounting, doesn't match the accounting manual and the definition of committed versus unassigned.
Right. And I have three others, I'm not sure, I'll just so a COSO audit, so one of the requirements for an organization is to have, be responsible for the internal controls. Do you have a kind of a, whether it's a self-evaluation or evaluation that you do to assess kind of that, like a COSO level of internal control? And is that something that's reported out to the board and or to the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it is part of our audit. We do a COSO evaluation as part of gaining an understanding of the control environment and just the general controls. We do it regardless if it's a financial or accountability audit, so it's always there. It would only be reported out if we had an issue to report on specifically. But we do have an internal control evaluation tool that we have provided to governments if they want to self-evaluate. It's a series of questionnaires that you can go through, and it's really good at identifying if there's potential areas where you might not have policies or procedures or adequate controls, and we'd be happy to share that if you'd like
Yeah, I
that.
think that'd be cool. And the internal auditor, there's been some question during the past year about having an internal auditor who has internal auditors. Is that something that you guys look at in terms of your,
Do we look at which school districts have internal auditors?
or is there any processes that just the district's own internal choices whether or not to have an internal auditor or not?
It's really a management decision. It's not something that we would comment on. I can't speak of any school districts in our area that I know of that have internal audit. I know Seattle has had some from time to time, but they're so huge. And then we see them in the community college arena, but I haven't seen any in the school district side.
Okay.
So typically it's, it falls on the accounting manager and all of those great things to kind of do those kind of functions, but.
I'm gonna drop off the call, you guys, okay?
Okay, Brian, thank you.
Thanks for much.
Thank you so much.
And the last question I had was just about impact fees and the question about, I know we don't currently collect impact fees, and just wondering about, because we have a lot of growth, we're having challenges with providing the kind of space, the kindergarten change that OSPI made very difficult for our district for this upcoming year. So in terms of impact fees, is there anything that you guys do as an auditor related to that, or is that, again, something that?
Really, we only audit for compliance. Are the impact fees being used for what they were?
If we're collecting.
Right, if you're collecting
So
them.
since we're not, you're really not doing any?
No, we don't speak to whether or not you should collect them. It's just once they've been received, are they being used appropriately?
Okay.
So. Any other? We cover everything?
Yeah, those were the questions that I had.
Is there any other questions we can answer?
Just appreciate being able to part of the process.
Oh, that was the question, is in terms of if there are any concerns or questions, when would the reporting draft, when would we meet again, or is it just a final report that's issued? What's the deadline, timeline dates for?
Well, I can say that the audit, at this point, I'm guessing that the audit is gonna wrap up the very beginning of February is the budget plan.
And the field work?
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so what we intend to have is the exit, well, by the time we leave in February is my plan. So we just had a discussion about that. But, so if any recommendations come up, the processes will be in discussion with Jolie and with management about any recommendations. And then similar to this process, as far as providing an invitation to the exit conference, that's the information will be sent out to management of what we're going to be discussing, and then we'll discuss the recommendations at the exit.
So you're targeting your exit conference by midwinter break,
When is your midwinter break?
3rd week of February, President's Day week?
We can flexible, we're flexible,
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean, that's
I
just,
mean,
that's just
we'll-
much quicker, it's
Right.
earlier than it's ever been, in
Yeah.
my recollection.
You're
so.
one of the first districts and
Yeah.
first to be done.
So as soon as you get done, you just want to finish the audit, do the exit, publish the report?
Yeah, I mean, your deadline's not till May. I mean, we can.
Okay, that was, yeah.
We could
We'll be
wait.
done before May.
But, we try to be timely results. So, our goal is to get everything, reported out in an exit conference format in about 2 to 3 weeks from leaving site. But if additional conversations are needed, then we're happy to hold those, and then the report would actually be published 1 to 2 weeks following the exit conference. So we like to get in and out and share the results.
Have your hair for as long as possible. Give us some relief from us.
All right, well, we thank you all for your time.
Do you have a couple of extra
I
copies
do.
of that I can share with board members?
Absolutely. And I'll also be sending it out to electronically.
Okay, thank you very
Welcome
much.
to